I have a PhD in neuroscience and nuclear medicine and molecular imaging, which really sums up to brain imaging. So I do a lot of brain scans for a living. And I moved to Weill Cornell Medicine to launch the Women's Brain Initiative, first of all, where we're really trying to understand how brain health plays out differently in women than in men, with a strong focus on Alzheimer's prevention. So prevention of dementia and associated neurological deficits. What we have learned from many years of research is that the risk of Alzheimer's disease starts becoming manifest in women's brains already in midlife. So what we learned is that Alzheimer's disease is a disease of midlife with symptoms that become clear on clinical grounds in old age. But the most important age to focus on for preventative efforts is midlife. So that begs the question of what happens to women in midlife that could potentially explain why Alzheimer's disease at the end of the day affects more women than men. Because currently, almost 2/3 of all Alzheimer's patients are women. So it's really important to focus on sex-driven strategies also for Alzheimer's prevention. So what we've learned about the critical period of midlife is that menopause really impacts a woman's brain as much as it impacts a woman's ovaries. However, traditionally and historically, menopause has been associated with an issue with the ovaries, which is why if you're going through menopause, you go see an OBGYN specialist and not a neurologist or psychiatrist or otherwise brain specialist. But in reality, menopause is defined in science as a neuroendocrine transition. So a transition that impacts your neurological system as well as your endocrine system. And our main question back in 2019 was, what exactly happens in the brain as women go through menopause? It could potentially explain the higher lifetime risk of Alzheimer's disease, but also help us understand why so many women, over 80% of perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, also develop brain symptoms during menopause, whether the hot flashes, the night sweats, insomnia, depression, anxiety, the brain fog, the memory lapses. Those are neurological symptoms that have nothing to do with the ovaries, that have been widely overlooked in clinical practice because of this disconnect between what's OB/GYN territory and what is brain territory. So our work was really aimed at bridging the gap and bringing these two fields together, because no woman has the luxury of forgetting about her brains or her ovaries. So we really need to look at every woman as an organism. So then I'll take you back with me to 2019, now 5 years ago, when we were doing a lot of work on the menopause brain to really map out brain changes and things that happen in the brain as a result of the menopause transition. And we were seeing that every type of brain scan we were doing would show some changes and some effects. So what we learned after 2019, but also currently, is that as a woman goes through menopause, there's a chance of brain energy levels going down, right? On average, we have measured and quantified that there's a drop in brain estrogen, in brain energy levels by about 20-30%. There is also a change in gray matter volume. There's a decline in white matter volume as well. There are changes in connectivity. There are changes in blood flow. There are changes in cellular energy. And the question has always been, why? What is driving? What part of menopause is driving these changes? And traditional theories really state that estrogen is the master regulator of women's brain health. It's a neuroprotective hormone, not just a sex hormone, that shields your brain from harm, supports cellular energy, supports connectivity, supports blood flow, supports immunity, reduces oxidative stress. It does a lot of beautiful things inside your head that we were absolutely not able to see. Why not? Because we did not have a technology that allowed us to measure, quantify, or visualize estrogen activity in the brain. So that was 2019. When I learned that, I said, this is unacceptable. Women are half of the population. All women who live long enough, but the vast majority of women go through menopause. Just as part of being a woman born with ovaries, or a person born with ovaries. And also, a lot of women take hormones. We started puberty. We put girls on birth control, often hormonal birth control, very early on in life. Then we take hormonal therapies for menopause. And so many women also take hormonal therapies for cancer, right? For some types of cancer. And we have absolutely no idea what these therapies do in the brain. We know that they get to the brain, but we have no idea what to do, how much you need, for how long, when to stop. So that was 2019, and I went to my radiochemistry department at Weill Cornell Medicine. We have a fantastic radiochemistry department. And I said, I need a tracer for estrogen. And they said, good luck, because there isn't one. That's when the unacceptable part came out. And I said, well, look, we need to come up with something that works. And so we fast forward to 2020, we had the technology, we got FDA approval, then we got shut down for COVID for a year. But then we started enrolling people in the studies, around the women really in the study. And once we reached a certain sample, we started looking at not just if the uptake was good enough, which appeared to be the case, but also if it was possible to find differences between women who were premenopausal with a regular menstrual cycle, perimenopausal with a regular cycle. And that's when the symptoms start coming up, like the hot flashes, the insomnia. Usually they impact you actually most at the perimenopausal stage. And then we had a group of women who were past the final menstrual period, and therefore they were postmenopausal. And what we learned is something really interesting that actually goes directly against the theories that we had about the ways that the brain responds to menopause. So all the evidence we had about menopause's impact on the brain came from animal studies. And rodents are not women. But also, rodents don't go through menopause the way the women do. And the big distinction is that rodents typically die soon after the end of their reproductive life, whereas women live easily another third of their lives in a postmenopausal stage. So clearly there's something more to the way the women's brains might be able to adapt or adjust, perhaps, to menopause. However, what we knew from animal studies is that the theory was that the brain becomes desensitized to estrogen after menopause. The idea is that estrogen is no longer present, so the brain stops making estrogen receptors and everything kind of shuts down. What we found in women is exactly the opposite. We actually get a stronger signal after menopause than before, up to 12 years past the final menstrual period. So what we are seeing is an upregulation of estrogen receptors a little bit throughout the brain, suggesting that the brain is still sensitive to estrogen, still wants estrogen, and is in fact actively looking for estrogen, which was the main finding of the study. So we have two findings. Number one, it is possible to measure hormones inside the brain. This was the first ever successful study to show that it is possible to measure any hormone really inside the brain. We did estradiol, which is the most bioactive form of estrogen. And number two, that women who are past menopausal for up to 12, perhaps 15 years, their brains are still receptive to estrogen, which, of course, the next step is to test whether hormone therapies impact the signal.